True. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Jenkins of Black Talk Platform, and tonight we are discussing incarceration during COVID-19. Incarceration during COVID-19. My guests are Rukia Lumumba. She is the executive director of the People's Advocacy Institute in Jackson, Mississippi. Good evening, everyone. And she and her organization and many organizations in Mississippi were leaders in the justice fight in the parchment prisons during the parchment prison crisis. That crisis is not yet over, and I'm hopeful that she'll be able to share some updates as to the health and welfare of the incarcerated at Parchment and perhaps other prisons and jails near Jackson and throughout Mississippi. My second guest is Dr. Harold Dean Trulear. He is a professor at Howard Divinity School at Howard University, and he is the National Director of Healing Communities USA. He also served as an integral part of my demonstration project team in helping me get to the point where I am, Dr. Deborah Jenkins, today. He has been a blessing. I've learned a lot, and because of his efforts and the others who participated, I now am a restorative justice expert, specifically focusing on children of the formerly incarcerated. Rukia has joined us, and we're waiting for Dr. Trulear. I'm going to bring on Dr. Rukia Lumumba. Hi, unmute. Let me unmute you. I think you're muted. Can you? Oh,
sorry about that. Yeah. How are you doing?
It's okay. Hi, how are you?
Good.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well. I thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. Wouldn't you know, I think I have a Lumumba sandwich because I woke up this morning and who was on the TV other than your brother, because you all are having some crises down there around COVID-19. And for those of you who don't know, Miss Lumumba is a part of a legacy of social justice, and her father, correct me if I'm wrong, was the first African-American mayor in Jackson, Mississippi.
Not quite.
Am I wrong about that?
He wasn't the first. He was not the first.
He wasn't.
But he was the most radical, is what we say. Mm-hmm. The most revolutionary.
I was going to say he was the most impactful, and yes. And her brother is now the current mayor, but she doesn't stand in their shadows. She is leading the way around prison reform and reentry justice, and I'm just so happy to have her on with us tonight. Rukia, can you please give us a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit more about yourself and your organization, please?
Definitely, and please let me know if my audio or video is acting up. Sometimes we have hard trouble with internet service out here in Mississippi, where I am in Jackson, Mississippi. So just let me know, and if there's an alternative number I can call that may be helpful, I can do that as well. But a little bit about me. I do come from an amazing legacy of beautiful human beings who have dedicated their lives to fighting for our liberation, for our freedom, for a freedom for us to live in safe communities, to have joy, to have the best of what life has to offer. So I am the daughter of Chokwe Lumumba, the late mayor, Chokwe Lumumba, and human rights advocate and attorney, and the amazing human rights activist and community leader Nubia Alake Lumumba, who was my mother, who preceded my father in death, right? And so I am also the sister of Chokwe Antar Lumumba, who's the current mayor. But one of the things that I say that I'm also, that people tend to forget, is that I'm also the manager of his campaign, right? So I'm an electoral strategist with a deep understanding of what community-led governance is. And not just co-governance, we're talking about community-led governance, which is our North Star, which is the goal that we want to see. Community co-governance is that in-between phase where we're trying to bring ourselves closer to being engulfed in more political activity. But our goal is to actually lead from the bottom up, right? And so that's the work that my parents taught us a long time ago. So I had the benefit of working on my father's campaign for city council, and then his campaign for his mayoral election, and then the beautiful opportunity to support my brother and help him in his campaign for a people's governance. And so that's where we are. We also will be pushing forth his campaign again for 2021 so that he can be reelected as mayor. So I invite everyone to join us and to support us at Lumumba 2021 is the website, www.lumumba2021.com. So looking forward to that. But the work that I do primarily is centered around the intersections of criminal justice or the criminal system and electoral work, right? And so I have an organization called the People's Advocacy Institute, which is a local organization here in Mississippi that focuses on being an incubator for transformative justice in the South. And that means that we really build communities' capacity to actually become the system that we want to see around taking care of our folks. And so we really work towards deconstructing systems of oppression that exist, and that includes the criminal system, the system of mass incarceration, mass criminalization, the system of what people are now deeming crimmigration, right? This immigration process that we see happening. It funnels into understanding violence as much more than just the physical violence that we experience, to violence, economic violence, a violence around inadequate housing, a violence around the root causes that cause people to suffer and be stressed out to even cause physical violence amongst each other, right? And so we look at all of those things and begin to develop solutions. So the core root of the People's Advocacy Institute is this understanding that community is central, not peripheral, to system change. That faith-based organizations, that community grassroots organizations, that individuals, that those of us closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, right? And it's this understanding that any policies and practices that are developed without us is void of the very genius of those that are most impacted and understand what the solution should be, right? And so we really work towards that. And so some of the, and I'll be quiet after this, some of the things that we've been able to help launch in Mississippi, because we do serve as an incubator, we're not trying to hold or own anything. We're actually trying to put resources, tools, training, and education into the hands of community members to actually be self-sustaining and create the systems that we want to see. So we've helped launch the Mississippi Bail Fund Collective, which is a host of individuals and organizations and Black mothers who have been bailed out themselves, to begin to push. It's the only bail fund in the state of Mississippi, right? And so we're bailing out Black mamas this year. We bailed out Black mamas last year, and we bailing out people, period, right? People who are sitting in prisons or jails in Mississippi because they can't afford bail, right? The other thing we helped out with the Mississippi Prison Reform Coalition. In December 31st of 2019, we saw an uprising in Mississippi prisons. People incarcerated in Mississippi said, enough is enough. I don't care what the retribution will be. I am going to speak up. I'm going to let you know what is happening inside of these prisons, the treatment that we are receiving. People literally living in cells with sewage surrounding them, right? Sewage, toxic sewage, people, guards allowing people to be beaten to death, bodies laying dead for days and days and days, right? And the smell of that. and just on and on and on. I mean, no water, no running water, people literally not taking showers for 6 weeks, not drinking, having drinkable water, right? That's an environmental injustice, right? And it's also a physical injustice. I super apologize. Hold on. I had a leak in my house, and so that's my godfather coming to check it out. Hold on 1 second.
Okay,
Please.
no problem, no problem. Listen, while we're waiting for Rukia to come back, I mean, I'm just on the edge of my seat as she runs down the prison conditions in Mississippi. I want you to invite everyone that you know to come on this live right now, either through Facebook or YouTube at Black BLK Talk TLK platform, because we cannot afford to forget about our incarcerated brothers and sisters. She's giving you a global perspective of what is going on with them daily. This was happening to them prior to COVID-19. Now imagine how much worse it's gotten for those who are incarcerated, not only in Mississippi, but throughout the nation. But I have an affinity for Mississippi before Rukia comes back, because I've been working down there, me and my children, been working in Mississippi. And if there's anyone from New York Theological Seminary, I see Dr. Judy Pride is watching with us today, this evening. You are familiar with Glendora, Mississippi, and I just became a part of that community. And by extension, I found out about the work Rukia was doing in Jackson. And she and I and a host of others were supposed to do a huge festival this past weekend during Memorial Day weekend, because she mentioned economic violence, inadequate housing violence, and the people of Glendora, they are living in abject poverty. And I wanted to do, and I want to do something to impact their lives in a positive way. And so we are prayerful that even as her brother prepares for re-election, that we're pretty sure he's going to get, because he has been, his record for goes beyond Mississippi. We'll be able to do this next spring and make it a dream, a reality for the people in Glendora. So Rukia's back with us. Rukia, you said so much, and having a great legacy like that, I would hope that one day if my children are being interviewed, they can also point back to their dad and myself and say that my parents provided a great foundation for me and my brothers, and we're now doing this, and we're an extension of them, but we got it early and we are committed to it. And so talk to me for a minute, since Dr. Trulear is not here, so it's our time right now until he shows up, and hopefully he will, about the Mississippi Bail Reform Collective. I'm so interested in that. I'm glad that you said that it's now expanded beyond the mothers, even though that's so worthy. Tell us a little bit about that, because I always think of Mississippi as a microcosm of Black life in this United States. Whatever's happening in Mississippi, those of us who live outside it want to ignore what's happening there. I'm not one of those people, clearly, but I always go back to Mississippi. There's always news about some injustice in Mississippi, and those injustices usually impact Black people. So talk to me a little bit about the Mississippi Bail Reform Collective, if you will.
Yeah. So the Mississippi Bail Fund Collective. So they're two different. We got one, the Mississippi Bail Fund Collective, and then we have the Mississippi Prison Reform Coalition. So they're two separate entities, both working to really decarcerate one, and then to transform a system that has completely just been a system of injustice. So the fund, the Bail Fund Collective, is really about, it's made up of the State Department of Public Defender Service, which, unlike many other places, does not receive, like many places actually, does not receive a lot of funding. So there are plenty of people who can't even, the Public Defender Service can't even represent, right? A whole nother issue we can talk about later. But okay. So, it's them, it's mothers who have experienced jail and incarceration themselves. It's social workers and other folks who have been support to folks that have experienced hardship and need some support. It's advocates and it's individuals who are just concerned, working together to raise money to bail people out. The unique thing about our bail fund is that we don't only just bail folks out. When they get out, we ensure that we are providing them with additional supports. Additional supports to one, yes, make it back to court, because that's the main purpose of bail, is that they say it's to require people to show back up in court. So we make sure that people have fare to get to and from court. We make sure that people have more than just that. We want to make sure that when they get home that they have food on their table. So as people are getting out, we make sure that we give them some financial support to make sure that they have groceries in the house and that they can get whatever medication they may have been missing. The first woman that we bailed out, and the bail fund is only about a year old now, the first woman we bailed out in 2019 through the support of the National Bailout, was a 66-year-old mother, who had chronic health issues, who had been in jail for 6 months because she couldn't afford bail before we helped to get her out. For 6 months. We recently helped bail out a gentleman in northern Mississippi, DeSoto County, who had been in jail for over 2 months because he couldn't afford the $150 bail that was provided to him, right? I mean, it can range, and it's ridiculous. Yeah. So that's the Mississippi Bail Fund Collective.
It's incredible.
So take out reform. It's fun. Mississippi Bail Fund Collective. And so, and if folks are interested in learning more, they can look us up on Facebook, Mississippi Bail Fund Collective. You can also go to the People's Advocacy Institute.com, and you can learn more about the bail fund there. But it's a really important body of work that we're doing. Yeah. And then we have the Prison Reform Coalition.
Go. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that, because I was also trying to connect with them as well. You all have a page up on Facebook, and I did speak to someone, and I thought the work that you all were doing was great. And I wanted to send care packages because I had seen one of your colleagues on a David Banner podcast episode.
Yes.
And she said, I can't remember her name, but she was dynamic. Is it Gloria? I'm not sure her name. You can let me know.
We had 3 folks on there: Sharon Brown, Alicia Juckins, and John Knight. It might be.
No, John Knight was also on that same podcast.
Yep.
And he was dynamic as well. But it was a female, and she was saying that you all needed care packages to give to some of the people. And I kept trying to contact someone earlier on this year and send stuff, because I live in a community that really reaches out beyond ourselves, but also my church community. So I never was able to do that. But now that we're talking here, at a later date, we can, if you all are still in need of that, we can definitely try to send some stuff.
Yeah, we definitely are. And folks can reach out to us at mprcoalition@gmail.com. And I might be able to type it into the chat, so then you can, it's MP.
You can.
Coalition. Yeah, so at gmail.com. Yeah, so that we can definitely be in communication with folks around that. We want to make sure, because one of the things we're pushing for right now, like everybody else across the nation, is that we're pushing for the release of folks who are vulnerable inside of prisons to be released immediately due to COVID. So that includes people living with disabilities, that includes people who are elders, that includes young people, that includes people who are serving time, who are convicted as juveniles and are still serving time inside of prison. We also are pushing for people who have less than 2 years left on their sentence to be released. We're pushing for folks who are sitting in immigration detention centers to be released. And we're pushing for protective gear and support to be provided to folks behind those prison walls, and to staff as well, so that they don't infect folks that are there. And so the other piece that's really important is that we highlight the need for women to be released. Oftentimes we don't hear about that. Working with our national partners, the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women, we are pushing and leading the Mississippi Clemency Campaign locally to have women released that are sitting behind Mississippi prison walls. And so.
Okay, I want to take this time right now to share, and I think I mentioned to you that I will share a few statistics that I got from the Equal Justice Initiative, and it says, as of May 21st, I want people to know how critical this is. And so you just listed for us the populations, the specific population groups that you all are pushing to have released. But let me just give some general numbers here so that people will understand that this is a critical situation that incarcerated peoples are in. According to the Equal Justice Initiative, as of May 21st, there are more than 44,000 incarcerated people and staff who are testing positive for COVID. And this is not just Mississippi, this is nationwide. And more than 462 have died. 7 out of the 10 largest outbreaks in the country have been at correctional facilities. 70% of people incarcerated in federal correctional institutions, one in specific, Lompoc, California, are positive. The vulnerable populations are just as Rukia just mentioned, older adults, and people who are at higher risk of serious complications from COVID. They make up some of the largest share, and they're likely to have poor health and limited access to quality medical services, which are already problems inside most jails and prisons. In Alabama, I included these statistics because my home is in Alabama. In Alabama, which has the highest rate of prison homicides. Let that sink in. Alabama's prisons has the highest rate of homicides in the nation, having 10 out of the last 8 months and 26 in the past 2 years. And Rukia mentioned that their work around the prison, I'm thinking Parchment, but perhaps there are others as well. But the nation's eye turned to Parchment earlier this year because of all of the deaths and the deplorable conditions that the incarcerated brothers and sisters were living in, primarily the men. And how many, I think at that time, your new governor had not come in yet. The outgoing governor was addressing it. I'm not sure how effective your current governor has been. I know he came in and made some changes, but can you give us an update on what's going on at Parchment, and any problems that you're having with the government in trying to get justice for them?
Yeah. So first I'll say is that we say Parchment is everywhere. That was a term coined by some of our comrades with Until Freedom, Angelo Pinto, and my son, the General. It's this understanding that the conditions in Parchment are being experienced throughout all of the prisons in Mississippi. And so early on, we saw deaths throughout the prisons in Mississippi. We highlighted Parchment in February and in late January, because in Parchment, what we saw were some of the worst conditions, because people were not only being treated as less than human beings and beaten and tortured, but they were also living in sewage, as I explained before, backed up sewage, in their cells, no drinkable water, conditions that we weren't seeing for the first time, right, in late December, early January, but conditions that we have seen over and over and over again for decades. And people behind those walls finally saying, I don't care what will happen to me. I am going to speak out. I am going to show images of what is happening to us right now. To this day, it's still the same old. Nothing has changed. The governor,
Wow.
the current governor, Tate Reeves, agreed to shut down one of the worst units in Parchment, Unit 29. That was a slow process, but Unit 29 is just as bad as Unit 31, right? And other units within Parchment. So shutting down one unit doesn't solve the problem. You have to shut down the whole prison. It's a prison, and let me calm down a little bit, because every time I talk about it, I get really passionate, because I want people to really understand how horrific the conditions are inside of this prison. This is a prison that existed before Reconstruction, right? It was a plantation. After Reconstruction, it was turned, during Reconstruction, it was turned into a prison, right? It has existed since that time as a place of oppression and pain and suffering. Renovations haven't been made to Parchment since 1982, maybe 1985. So can you imagine what people are living in? You know, mold. I mean, in the summer times, it's scalding hot inside where people can barely breathe. In the winter, people not having enough warmth or heat to stay warm and proper clothing. And the conditions that we see in Parchment, women also see in Central Mississippi Correctional Facility, which is another facility for women and men, right? Housed separately. We see similar conditions there. Mold, things going on where people are taking in toxic environments and unable to breathe, asbestos, and a number of other things. And so right now, all of the prison population is really considered vulnerable at this very moment, because their health conditions, right? The health conditions inside are such that you are a vulnerable population, because you're already in a space of unhealthiness, right? You're not getting proper drinking water. You're not getting your proper medication. Most people you learn that a lot of people over time develop high blood pressure, diabetes, because of the type of diet that they're forced to eat. Oftentimes forced to eat ramen noodles and other things high in sodium that raises your blood pressure, because the food provided by the institution, by the facility, is so horrific that you can't even take that in, right? You saw pictures of brothers and sisters showing plates from the dining hall that has food left over from the day before stuck to it, or meals looking like it's undercooked or barely cooked, right? And so, you know, just this is a vulnerable population, and we can't treat it as if it's not. We can't treat it as if it's not. People are living with asthma, diabetes. In Mississippi right now, inside of these prisons, folks literally can't even get their insulin, right? Basic things as insulin. A lot of the work that we've been doing with the Mississippi Prison Reform Coalition is responding to people's medical needs, pushing and demanding the wardens and other folks in charge there to literally just take the person to the hospital, right? Just get the medical care. A lot of the calls we get are about medical care that people are being denied. This
is horrifying. And I think that, and I know it's not only Blacks who are in the prisons. And so in a very general sense, they're being recriminalized because they're inside a prison. They're being dehumanized because they're inside a prison. I do believe I did hear, and I'm not sure if it was John Knight on that same podcast, but he talked about, or someone spoke about, how many of the corrections officers are female. Is that correct? Many of them are female, and they are harassed. I mean, so there are these two sides of a coin of abuse, and they're not paid well, but they need these jobs to system actually do, where you're trying to provide for your family, but you're also you're in a sense incarcerated with the incarcerated, and you're not respected. And then there are those corrections officers that you mentioned who are allowing them to fight and encouraging things like that. And I think we have to always be honest about all that's going on. because we're not trying to protect anyone, especially those who have power over incarcerated people. Look, the law tells us is law, you go to jail, you serve your time. Well, you serve your time, but you're still supposed to be viewed as and treated as
Mhm.
a human being. It's such a joke when they talked about what
Mhm.
was the word they used to use? About rehabilitation. They don't
Mhm.
even use it anymore because they know that that is not in their minds to do. But I feel like this is a vulnerable population, not only because they already have these pre-existing conditions medically, but because society is saying to them, you're dispensable. We don't need you. You've
Mhm.
already transgressed the laws of the country. So we don't have to take good care of you. And I really want us to really understand that even if you don't have a family member who's close to you, who's incarcerated, or anyone that you personally know, it can so easily be anyone that we do know. It could actually be us, especially as Black people, because we are disproportionately targeted for crimes that we don't even commit.
Yeah.
And even talking about the bail fund,
Mhm. Mhm.
$150 doesn't seem like a lot to many people. But if you don't have $150 and you're
Yeah.
forced to stay in jail for 2 months or even more because you don't have the resources even within your own community to get $150, it may as well be $150,000. And so we're grateful for funds like yours, and we put a link up for you where we can definitely have people go if they want to support the work that you're doing for any of the initiatives you talked about. Let me go back to the medical piece for 1 second. So you're fighting to get them the attention they need.
Mhm.
Is it that they don't have infirmaries, or many of them are so critical that they actually need to go to area hospitals
It's
for
a
treatment?
Right. It's a layered. It's a very layered issue. So one is that they don't have enough staff to actually respond
Mhm.
to the medical needs of people that are currently incarcerated. So over and
Mhm.
over and over again, we hear correctional officers indicate that they have to choose between whether to give someone insulin on this hall or whether to respond to someone over here who's saying they may need their high blood pressure medication, right? And not being able to move fast enough, or another person who just may have fainted or fell out for some other reason. Having one person to a unit of 124 people. Basically, what you're doing is having that person determining whose life is more valuable than the other person's life, right? And so, one, it's unfair to the people that
Absolutely.
have to be
Absolutely.
susceptible to that. But it's unfair to the people also who have to work in that type of environment. That is unsafe and inhumane working
Yes.
conditions, right? And so we need to call that out as well. One
Yes.
of the things that, we often hear when we're talking about closed parchment, because we believe that that's the only solution, that you have to shut it down. We have to shut down parchment. That's a first step.
Mhm.
Then we can work on shutting down a number of these other institutions. But one of the things that we hear is that, oh, well, it's such a it provides an economic revenue for folks in that community. Well, one of the things we have to remember is that we can't make cash off of people suffering and pain, right? That
Absolutely.
only causes our communities additional suffering and pain. We're literally forcing
Absolutely.
people to go into these environments to make a living, and we're traumatizing them. We're literally traumatizing them. And as we traumatize the workers, they're going home to their loved ones, to their sisters, to their brothers, to their children, to their husbands, to their wives. And that family is then being traumatized, right? It creates
So
an
true.
unhealthy reality for our communities, a cycle, right? A cyclical situation where we're just funneling trauma over and over and over again, right? And it doesn't look too
Yeah.
different from those on the plantation that were forced to be overseers to those that were forced to be in the fields, right? And so we have to be really careful about how we look at how we make our money, right? Because sometimes how we make our money is harming us a lot more than it's helping us. And so,
Absolutely.
that's one thing. Um, you know, the other thing around the medical piece. So one is that there's definitely not enough staffing. But two, they just don't have, you know, companies that really care about people inside to care enough to provide them with adequate medical treatment. And so you might have an infirmary, but there's no staff on the weekend, right? So you don't have anybody to go to when there's an emergency, right? There's no real protocol that is taken seriously so that when someone needs to go to the hospital, they are able to get to the hospital in a timely manner, right? One person that we assisted, I won't mention his name, but he literally for 3 weeks sat with a broken arm, to the point where when we saw, he took pictures and sent it, you could see his bones sticking out of his arm. For 3 weeks, he sat in pain, going in and out of consciousness, until the warden finally approved him to be taken to the hospital to get his arm reset and healed and casted. I mean, I'm talking about basic things. People going into
like
and seizures and things like that. Mm-hmm.
You know, these seem like criminal offenses to me. Where if I broke someone's arm right now outside, they would take me to jail. But even though the warden didn't break the man's arm, he allowed his arm to remain untreated for 3 weeks, and it's probably never going to be reset properly. I don't know what the outcome was, but no one should live like that. So you know, this is horrifying. This is so horrifying. So we all know, or many of us know, that Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the country. After COVID, all of the states are going to be, you know, near bankrupt because the federal response has been so abysmal. So that just means it gets worse for a state like Mississippi. How are things locally in Jackson? Do you all have a Jackson jail? Is there a local jail in Jackson?
Yeah.
And how is it administered?
Yeah, very good question. One of the things before I jump to Jackson is that I do want to say that Mississippi at this point in time is considered to have the highest percent of incarceration. And so right now we have, we're the largest incarcerator in the nation right now, with 19,000 people incarcerated in our state. We know for a fact, and that's why we push. So there are some solutions to everything that I'm talking about. We know that one of the biggest solutions is to decarcerate, to literally decrease the prison population. There are over 1,000 people currently behind Mississippi prison walls that have already been granted parole. I'm talking about women and men who've already been granted parole and have not been released because the Mississippi Department of Correction claims that it has not been able to find them adequate housing. So they're sitting behind prison walls because they supposedly don't have adequate housing when they're released. That's one group of people. We know that there's another set of over 300 elders who are aging in prison, 50 and older, who could be released today. And we know that less than 2% of elders, of seniors released from prison, ever reoffend. That's a whole nother grouping of people that can be released. I mean, I can go on and on. We know that there are 86 people who were as teenagers charged as juveniles without the possibility of parole, with life without the possibility of parole, that today have been sitting in there for years and can be released right now. And so we have groupings of people that you can let out right now. We know that 40% of the people behind Mississippi prison walls are there for drug offenses. That's a whole population of folks that you can be releasing right now.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, there are some folks. But let's go to Jackson. So Jackson, Mississippi is the capital of Mississippi. It is we inside of Jackson. We are located inside of the county of Hinds County, Mississippi. Hinds County has a county jail. It actually has two county jails. One which is located inside of the city limits of Jackson, and one which is located outside of the city limits of Jackson. Jackson, the Hinds County Jail located inside of Jackson, as well as the one located right outside of Jackson. What we have is a push by advocates across the city and across the county to really incarcerate the jails. So to ensure that the jails were releasing people and that people weren't being arrested and placed in jail during the COVID pandemic and the shutdown. So our Hinds County DA, Jody Owens, who was just elected in 2019, in November of 2019, is a former advocate himself and actually helped to decrease the jail population. So we were able to see people being released from our county jail, Hinds County Jail, which is a good thing. We still think there are more people that should be released. And so we are going to continue to push for that and continue to bail them out. But off the bat, we saw 100 and something people released. The numbers may have increased even more now, to the point where when you know, there was one person that was arrested about 3 weeks ago that reached out to us for bail support, and he was the only person in the jail, his area of the jail. And so we know that the numbers have began to decrease significantly in Hinds County, and we want to see it stay that way. Just because the pandemic is over doesn't mean that people need to be just funneled back into jails every time, you know, they interact with law enforcement. What it shows us is that jail is not a requirement, right? That when people are charged with a crime, we might see that things are okay if they're just provided with a summons and have to return to court to deal with that charge. So we want to look at what has been working during the pandemic that we want to continue to push as new policy, as opposed to reverting back to a system of mass criminalization and incarceration, of funneling people into a very traumatic situation when they haven't been found guilty and they haven't actually went through any trial process. So that's where we are in Jackson.
Okay, I mean, that's really good to hear about how the DA is working alongside organizations like yours to try to depopulate or what's the word you're using? Depopulate?
Oh, depopulate or decarcerate. Yeah.
Yes. Let me ask you, as we prepare to wrap up, I'm like an action person. What can we do? So I have your organization scrolling across below our faces, which I hope people will reach out to you to see what can be done to help near and far. But in terms of the faith-based churches and organizations, what role have they played in this fight?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a beautiful coming together of community during the COVID pandemic. And even during the prison uprising, I did see a huge community uprising here. You know, with 19,000 people incarcerated, most people know someone or have a loved one that's currently incarcerated. And so a lot of this hits home. It hits directly. And so when I go in stores, or I used to be in restaurants or different things like that, someone would always come up to me and say, you know, I have a brother, or I have a cousin, or I have, you know, a sister that is currently incarcerated or recently passed away inside of a facility. You know, the stories were just always coming. So community can identify with this issue of mass incarceration here in Mississippi. And it actually crosses color lines, right? We saw this with Black and white folks, mainly Black folks and then poor white folks, right? And so we saw this. And so you saw community, you saw churches come together and really began to push for common sense approach to what it looks like to actually have rehabilitation instead of simply punishment, right? The other piece, but during COVID, what I've seen, especially in the Jackson metropolitan area, is that we've seen churches, we've seen individuals, we've seen hardcore grassroots organizations come together. I mean, when I'm talking about, we see brothers and sisters who are a part of, you know, organizations that we have traditionally looked at and said, oh, they're causing the problem. We've seen them come together to be the solution. to make sure that communities that are living in abject poverty, that are suffering, are the most vulnerable economically, come together to ensure that people are fed by ensuring that we are providing food boxes weekly to people so that they can have groceries in their house and not have to leave to go to the grocery store. And that's for seniors and children. Making sure that hot meals are provided, because many of our residents many of our students relied on hot meals from school during the school week, right? And so when those meals no longer were available in school, we have to figure out, well, what we gonna do, right? How we gonna take care of our folks? I mean, so for weeks, I mean, since March 15, when we shut down, people coming together to feed our community. And most recently, we've come together as a coalition to actually help make sure that people are being tested. And so partnering with the city of Jackson and Jackson High Comprehensive Health have been able to go to certain locations in the city, specifically apartment complexes, and began to test folks to make sure that people are okay. And if they're not, making sure that they get the support that they need to become okay. So those are some of the things. It's been a beautiful, 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 beautiful undertaking that I've seen of people coming together to really save ourselves and to protect ourselves, to be healthy. I'm just in awe and in love with my community right now.
Awesome. That's great. Sorry for something like COVID to bring us together, but whatever works to bring us together is a good thing. Let me ask you a political question. Mike Espy, I believe he's running again for Senate.
He is. Mike Espy.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, Mike Espy is running for Senate again, for senator again. We want him to win because we do not want Cindy Hyde-Smith to win. And so he's running for Senate. We're encouraging folks to go out and vote. His election is November. Coming up in November, we want folks to get out to the polls. Make sure you go. It's been a little complicated out here with all the COVID stuff, but we're going to be pushing for folks to make sure that they can vote. We really need to push for extension of absentee ballots so that folks can vote absentee and not have to go into any polling station. We want to really push the state and other states to really allow mail-in ballots, right, to vote by mail. We really want to push a lot during this time because we don't want to lose people's vote. We want to see people engage, and we want them to engage in a safe way. So everybody, look out for Mike Espy.
Go. Yes.
Yeah.
He came so close. I was so rooting for him, and I'm hopeful that he will do well against her in the fall. There's a lot going on in Mississippi, and I don't want to overstate that because, again, I see Mississippi as being a microcosm of Black life in the United States. A report was just released the other day that New York City's mayor, my mayor, Bill de Blasio, has not visited Rikers Island at all in his second term, this term that he's currently in. And, there are policies being made around closing down Rikers, and that's reprehensible to me because you have to understand what people are going through. So what's the people who are incarcerated, the people who are in jail, we all remember Khalif Browder, the same exact scenario as what you just described with the 65-year-old woman and the man, exists not only in Rikers Island and not only in parts of Mississippi, but throughout this country.
That's right.
Especially as it relates to African Americans, because typically we earn less and we don't have a lot of disposable income, nor do we have resources in our families and friends who can make $150 bill for us. And so I applaud you in the great work you're doing. Offline, I would love to talk to you about those 1,000 that have been granted parole and see if you and I can, just troubleshoot around whatever you all are currently doing. And I may have some ideas myself where we can try to help get them out, because that makes absolutely no sense. That they have been granted parole, and because they cannot find them homes to be discharged to, they are staying in prison. It makes no sense. Rukia, I have been enriched in your conversation, your passion around this specific arm of social justice that you are doing, that you are leading, even as you gear up for your brother's reelection campaign. We're going to be in prayer for Jackson. We know his job is not easy. Your work is not easy. The coalitions that you are a part of down there. And look, we're all the same. We're all the same. I don't care if you're in New York. I don't care if you're in Jackson or Alabama. We're all the same, and we have to care enough about one another
That's right.
to help, even if it's 1,000 miles away. Whatever we can do to come together to make things a little bit better, not only for those who are incarcerated, but also for their families. And thank you for going through the mental anguish that clearly corrections officers have to go back home with, and it makes their family that much weaker because they're having to get released someplace. And um, because this is Mental Health Awareness Month, we really don't want to forget that there's so much going on with the people that we're sending in to care for the incarcerated, and they're barely able to care for themselves. So let me give you the last word. But before that, let me just announce to everyone, we've been doing faith and justice. Justice will always be a big part of the Black Talk platform because bodies that are Black are always being assaulted. We have issues that occurred over the last 24 hours here in New York City in Central Park with Amy Cooper. Yes, I'm putting her name out there. I'm glad she's been fired by Franklin Templeton because they say racism of any sort is not tolerable. She's been fired. Now GoFundMe needs to take down the page that's giving her sympathy. And then, of course, we heard about the vicious murder of George Floyd in Minnesota by four cops who have since been released of duty, been fired, but now we want them to be charged with this murder. So there's so much going on.
Yeah.
There's so much going on. Next week we're gonna take a break, and then we'll be back on June 2nd with Dr. Carl Mack, who will be talking to us about our finances and getting our financial houses in order so that we will have $150 saved away that's not for our personal use, but for situations where family or friends may need us to assist them in being bailed out. So stay tuned for that. And we want to give Rukia the last word. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins. I just want to just thank you and your listening audience for tuning in, for hearing what's happening here in Mississippi. If you want to support us, please, please, please feel free to reach out to us at info@peoplesadvocacyinstitute.com, or you can go to our website at www.peoplesadvocacyinstitute.com. There's so much happening. We need your support. We say that what happens here in Mississippi impacts the world. And so we've seen it over and over and over again, from the civil rights movement to the voting rights movement, and now to our modern day movements for liberation and justice of Black people. We say free the land. And thank you for all that you're doing, Dr. Jenkins, and for everyone who's listening, the role that you're playing in ensuring that our communities are made better every day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a great evening. We'll be in touch.
You too. Okay.
God bless.
You too. God bless.
Thank you.